to my channel. Thanks for stopping by. So the end of the year is getting really close, starting to think about what I'm going to wear to New Year's. And I came across a photo of Emily Ratajkowski wearing this sunshine satin yellow dress to a wedding in 2019. We're going to summer here in Australia, and I thought that might be perfect. So in this video, I have recreated Emily's dress, which is basically a midi skirt, a satin midi skirt, that goes to a maxi skirt, and then there's sort of a slip on one side and then more length on the other, and then there's two halter neck pieces that wrap up and around her neck and tie at the back. A bit choky, but it's fine. I found sort of 4 or 5 paparazzi shots of Emily in the yellow dress and have attempted to recreate my dress based off of the photos. It actually turned out really well, so I'm stoked. If you'd like to see how I recreated Emily's dress, then yeah, come on the journey with me. Grab a cup of tea or a snack and keep on watching. Firstly, I went to choose my fabric. I didn't actually end up with this one, but a very similar one. To start with, I'm going to work on the slip skirt. I'm making a pattern from a slip skirt I already have. This one is a wraparound skirt, so there's a bit more allowance for my hips and my butt. So I'm pinning up on the skirt where I need to add a little bit of extra fabric just because this skirt will be completely closed. I'm tracing the back piece of the skirt onto some butcher's paper. And did the same thing for the front of the skirt, so I'm just tracing up the band here. I'm adding 12 centimeters to the length of my skirt. So in the photos I have of Emily, one side sort of seems to be a maxi skirt, and then the other side of the skirt's a bit shorter. And marking out the midpoint of the back of the skirt so I can add an allowance to add in the zipper. Then I took my sweet time in cutting out all of my pattern pieces. I'm using a silver pen, which, may I say, was a big mistake, to trace my pattern onto my material. And cutting out my pieces. I'm attaching the front piece of the skirt to the front band piece of the skirt and doing the same for the 2 back pieces. And sewing the pieces together with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, right side of material to right side. Now I'm attaching my zipper before I join up the other pieces of the skirt, so around the skirt. And attaching the zipper to the other back piece of the skirt. Now that my zipper's in, I can sew up the rest of the seam on my 2 back pieces. I added a zigzag stitch into the seam allowance because my material was fraying really badly. Now I'm pressing my zipper and back seam open. I'm sewing the front piece of my skirt to the back piece, making sure I leave space to add in a side slit on the left-hand side of the skirt. I sewed about 1/3 of the way down on the left side of my skirt, so just above my knee, and press the rest of the skirt in by 1 centimeter. And top stitching on the centimeter I just pressed to make my side slit. At the top of the side slit, I'm adding in a stitch across just to make sure my material doesn't tear or fray. Now I'm hemming my skirt, making sure it's basically a maxi skirt on the right side, but ends just below the knee on the left. I'm pressing where I've pinned the bottom of my skirt to make hemming it a bit easier. I measured 2 centimeters as a seam allowance for my hem, so I'm cutting just above the 2 centimeters. I'm taking the 2 centimeters of seam allowance I just kept for my hem and folding 1 centimeter onto the other centimeter, which is what I'm pinning. And sewing up my hem. To make my 2 halter neck pieces, I'm measuring the front band of my skirt, so from one side seam to the other. It looks like both of the pieces end at the side seams and meet in the middle on the photos I've got of Emily. Taking those measurements, I'm cutting up my 2 halter neck pieces. I'm sewing up the sides of the halter neck, so if you have a rectangle, it's the 2 longer sides of each piece, just to make sure they don't fray and to give it a neat finish. And then stitching up where I pinned. I'm trying on the pieces I just made for my halter neck, and they are definitely not wide enough. Everything's about to fall out. So I'm starting my pieces again. No one wants a nip slip, so hopefully I do better this time because there's not much material left. I added a bit of extra material that I could press to make the edges of the halter neck really crisp. I tried on the skirt with the new pieces and they're pretty good. There might be a little bit too much material now, but I think better too much than too little. So I'm pinning the top to the skirt. Now I'm sewing up the band of my skirt, which will attach the 2 halter neck pieces. I'm using the original thinner halter neck pieces to attach to the thicker ones, to remove a bit of bulk and make it easier to tie up. I'm threading the new pieces inside out onto the thicker halter neck pieces using a safety pin. Once I've finally threaded the safety pin through with the thicker material underneath, I thread the thin, skinny piece of material on top to where I'm going to sew it. Once the thin piece is completely inside out, I join the end of the thick piece of the halter neck to the end of the thin piece and sew it. After sewing them together right side to right side, I now get the very satisfying task of turning the thin piece of material inside out, where you'll see where I've joined the thicker halter neck section with the thinner strap section. And finally, to finish off my masterpiece, I measured how long my strap should be and I'm stitching the ends up.